Hello, I'm State Representative Jim Buchy from the 84th House District. Welcome to Ohio in Focus.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Ohio in Focus, a program that brings state government to you. I'm your host, Cora Slack. We have with us today State Representative Jim Buchy, who serves the 84th House District, which includes all of Mercer County and parts of Auglaize, Stark, and Shelby counties. Thank you for joining us, Representative.
Thanks for having me again, Cora. I always look forward to this.
Always good to have you on the show. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're in the second month now of the 131st General Assembly with a new speaker, and all the members now have their committee assignments. We have two new committees, but your committee assignments are very similar to the ones that you had last General Assembly. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Last General Assembly, I was on the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee, and I have been on that committee ever since I came to the legislature originally in 1983 because of the dominance of agriculture in my district. And then I was on the Legislative Oversight Committee, and I'll be on that committee again this time. And I also will be a member of, or I am a member of the Public Utilities Committee, and this is the first time I've served in that assignment. So those are my three main committees, and I'm looking forward to a very productive session as we get moving.
And committees are obviously a very important part of the legislative process. Can you talk about their importance a little bit? Well,
of course, the bulk of the legislation that becomes law in this state it comes through the committee process, and it's where the public has an opportunity to weigh in on bills that are there to become law. And so we look forward to listening to our constituents, listening to people who have an interest in legislation, people who oppose legislation. And so the real work in the final product is done in the committee process. That's number one.
You mentioned that you're a member of the Agriculture Committee. Obviously, that's a very important topic in your district. What issues do you think will be tackled in that committee this year?
Well, the big issue that's going to dominate the next session in agriculture, and it's now the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. The big issue is water quality, and of course, as it relates to Western Ohio and the Western Lake Erie Basin. As you recall, last summer there was a problem with the drinking water in Toledo, and of course, my district being the largest agricultural district with diversified agriculture. We have a lot of livestock and poultry, and also Grand Lake St. Mary's, and that's been water quality has been an issue there, and all relates back to algae. And so we'll have legislation that will focus in on dealing with those with water quality. There'll be probably several bills that will be introduced and debated and discussed, and so that'll be a dominant piece of legislation. We always look at ways to affect business costs. How do we lower business costs in the agriculture community as well as everybody else? So I mean, there's just a host of issues like that we deal with every 2 years, but the big issue is water quality this year.
And we're going to touch on that a little bit later in the show, but we're going to jump ahead now and talk about gas prices.
Sure.
We've seen prices up to $4 and higher, but we've seen a lot of lower prices recently. But building on that, we've seen a lot of mandates from the federal government and President Obama. Can you kind of touch on what those are, explain those a little bit?
Well, of course, the attitude of the administration is basically anti-fossil fuel. We've seen what he's done with mandates in the coal industry, and quite frankly, you know from a personal standpoint how that affects you in your family. And what it ends up doing when the administration places restrictive mandates on fossil fuel, it makes it tougher to produce the product. And right now, he issued an edict on restricting methane in gas, and of course methane is so important, and frankly from my perspective, when he's trying to get at more regulations on natural gas, the shale gas play that we have in Ohio that's really building the economy and is contributing to the price of gasoline being about half of what it was 2 years ago, why it's definitely an just another piece in the anti-fossil fuel movement. And from my perspective, it's anti-environment, because methane, part of methane is water that goes back in the earth. And when you reduce the amount of water, you haven't done anything good for the environment.
Mm-hmm. This is a big issue for Eastern Ohio. Can you talk about the impacts it's going to have on that part of the state?
Well, of course, you know, here you've got a double-edged, you got a situation where there's been billions of dollars invested in capital equipment to go after the trillions of cubic feet of shale gas in Eastern Ohio. And of course, that's the area that has been the most economically depressed for years. And this is lifting up that area economically. It's providing jobs, it's creating wealth. It's just been a boon for the area. And so when you put restrictions like going after quantities and the quality of methane in the gas, what you're doing is you're taking away the investment, or the incentive to invest more. Then you add to the fact that the price of gasoline at the pump has dropped so dramatically. That's had a negative effect on the profitability of the shale gas industry, which has slowed down investment. Mm-hmm. So you got some really good things happening, because we as consumers are spending a lot less of our disposable income for fuel for our automobiles, while at the same time now we've got some negatives on the other end, and eventually it'll all balance out. But we don't need more government regulation on fossil fuel.
And where do you see this issue going in the future at both the state and the federal level?
Well, of course, here at the state level, we will do everything we can to mitigate that. And I'm hopeful that the folks in the United States Congress will address these restrictions in a positive way, so that we don't overburden the industry.
So we're going to move on to the education and talk a little bit about the Common Core. Last General Assembly, there was a bill that did not pass. But I think that I've heard that there's going to be a lot of work on it this General Assembly. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And of course, I was involved in the committee that heard House Bill 597, which would basically eliminate Common Core in Ohio and give us the opportunity to develop our own standards and curriculum and so on. And so we were not successful in getting that passed. But the issue is not going to go away, because there is a tremendous amount of concern and angst with parents and children and teachers and administrators about not only the implementation that we have in Common Core, but what the potential results are going to be that are not going to be positive. And so I myself, with the PARCC tests that have everybody in an uproar right now, we have children who don't want to go to school because they think they're not going to pass the tests and they don't want failure. Parents don't like what's going on. The teachers are confused because this is new testing. It has not been in place, and the administrators are frustrated because they've paid a lot of money to implement the Common Core standards for mathematics and English, and so it's, in my opinion, what needs to be done currently, if we can't eliminate Common Core. I do not like Common Core. I represent 20 of the best schools in the state of Ohio in the 84th House District by any measure you use. And I think what we need to do is pause and step back and let's reassess where we are and put into place a system developed by Ohio for Ohioans, and we can do that with good work and great people.
Well, you touched on this briefly. You mentioned PARCC testing. I'm sure that's a term a lot of our viewers have heard thrown around. Can you go a little bit more into depth as to what that is?
Yes, the PARCC testing, of course, is part and parcel of testing the Common Core standards of English and math, and they're new tests and they're hard tests. And when I say hard, they're different to the point where it's making it difficult for younger children, for example, in elementary school. And in the way the tests are structured, it's hard to analyze them and interpret what the questions are and how they're going to be answered and so on. I was involved in a meeting recently where I saw a PowerPoint with 4 questions asked in the 4th grade test, and I mean, the administrators didn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. So when you have a situation like that, and when you concentrate so much on testing and practice tests and how we're going to do this, from an actual time frame, it doesn't take up that much time, except what it's doing is it's taken away from teaching in the classroom. And that's where we need to be focusing our time.
We're going to go ahead and move on from education and go back to the issue of water quality. We've talked a lot about Grand Lake St. Mary's and the algal bloom issue. And there was a bill in the previous General Assembly, House Bill 490, which did not achieve full passage. What can we see? What do you foresee in the future with this issue?
Well, there were 490 contained an awful lot of subject matter, and as far as the language in that legislation that did not pass, as it relates to water quality in agriculture, what we're focusing on right now is how do we reduce nutrients going into the soil in the water, particularly in the western and northwestern area of the state, so that we reduce the phosphorus, which is what creates the algae. All you need is sunshine, water, and phosphorus. And of course, because of the dominance of animal and poultry livestock in Ohio, and so much of it being in west central Ohio and so on, we're working with farmers and have been for a long time, and producers through best management practices and bylaws and regulations to reduce the amount of nutrients going into the water. And so in my district is Grand Lake St. Mary's, which is the only distressed watershed in the state of Ohio. Now you add to that, I referred earlier about the problem we experienced in Toledo last year with the drinking water, and we've learned that there are practices in the cities as it relates to wastewater management and sewage treatment and dredging of mouths of rivers and disposal of that material and so on. And so we're looking at ways to help reduce the phosphorus going into Western Lake Erie, the Western Basin, from the cities and from the rivers. And so the legislation that we're working with right now is focused on those two areas, basically manure management and wastewater treatment management and river management.
I know last month the Agricultural Committee met off-site at a farm in Van Wert to talk about this issue. Do you anticipate more off-site meetings in the future for that committee?
I do, and I'm also we also are appreciating very much the input of the people who are on the ground, literally and figuratively, working with nutrients. So it's very helpful to us, and we want to make sure that when we're done, that we've created a situation that improves the quality, so that we don't have to worry about the water we drink, the water we have around us, and we still have an abundant supply of wholesome economic food.
Absolutely. Well, I know this water quality issue is of great concern to your constituents, and we always end the program with how they can best get in contact with you, whether it be about this water quality issue or any issue they might be having with state government. Can you just mention some of the best ways to get in contact with you?
Well, of course, if you need to get me right away, it's by phone. It's 614-466-6344. Email rep84@ohiohouse.gov, and every month we do a survey, and I would be hopeful that the viewers would fill out this month's survey, and that goes to tinyurl.com/Buchy February 2015.
Thank you so much, Representative. We really appreciate you joining us. And those survey questions that he mentioned, we saw on the screen, so please go and check that survey out. We look forward to seeing you on the next edition of Ohio in Focus, the program that brings state government to you. Thank you for joining us.